The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker, turning the city streets into mirrors that reflected the grey, heavy sky. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that feels like it has been dragging on for a week, damp and bone-chilling. Inside the interrogation room of the 12th precinct, the air was stagnant, smelling faintly of stale coffee, damp wool, and the metallic tongue of high-voltage anxiety. But the anxiety didn't belong to the woman sitting in the metal chair. Evelyn Vance sat with the posture of a queen forced to wait for a delayed flight in a budget terminal. She was beautiful in a way that felt manufactured, sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, hair the color of spun gold that hadn't moved a millimeter despite the humidity outside, and eyes that were a piercing, unsettling shade of blue. She wore a charcoal cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the detective's car, and her hands, manicured to perfection, rested loosely on the armrests of the uncomfortable chair. Attached to those elegant fingers were the sensors of a polygraph machine, wires snaked from her body like medical vines, feeding into a laptop that hummed quietly on the desk. The rhythmic scritch-scratch of the digital stylus on the screen was the only sound in the room, a hypnotic metronome counting down the seconds of her freedom. Detective Miller, a man whose face looked like a crumpled roadmap of bad nights and worse cases, leaned against the far wall. He was sweating. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, frustration radiating off him in waves. He had been at this for 2 hours. 2 hours of circling, probing, and attacking, trying to find a crack in the porcelain facade of the woman before him. "Let's go over it one more time, Mrs. Vance," Miller said, his voice gravelly. "Just to be clear." Evelyn didn't blink. Her heart rate, displayed on the monitor, remained a steady, boring line. "I have told you, Detective. Richard left on Sunday night. He said he needed space. He took his passport. He took the cash from the safe. He left. And you didn't think to call him." "Richard is a grown man and a billionaire," Evelyn replied, her voice smooth, lacking any tremor. It was a voice devoid of friction. "When men like Richard want to disappear, they disappear. If I called him every time he had a midlife crisis, I'd spend my entire life on the phone." Miller looked at the polygraph technician, a young woman named Sarah, who was staring at a screen with a furrowed brow. Sarah gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "Truth." The machine said she was telling the truth. But on the other side of the one-way mirror, in the darkened observation room, Dr. Arthur Sterling was not looking at the machine. He wasn't looking at the needles, the graphs, or the data. He was watching Evelyn's neck. Arthur stood in the shadows, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a man who blended into the background, unassuming until you looked directly into his eyes that seemed to dismantle you, piece by piece, to see how your gears turned. He was a specialist in human behavior, a mentalist who had spent 20 years studying the microscopic betrayals of the human body. He knew that the tongue could lie, and the mind could be trained to fool a machine, but the body always screamed the truth. "She's good," the police captain muttered, standing next to Arthur. "Too good. The machine is flatlining. No spikes on pulse, no galvanic skin response, no breathing changes. She's either innocent or she's sedated." "She's not sedated," Arthur said softly. His voice was calm, contrasting with the tension in the room. "And she's not innocent. Look at her left shoulder." The captain squinted through the glass. "What about it?" "Asked about it. It hasn't moved," Arthur observed, "for 45 minutes. Most people, even when trying to be still, have micro-adjustments. They shift weight, they relieve tension. Evelyn is holding herself in a state of artificial stasis. She is manually controlling her autonomic nervous system. She isn't relaxed, Captain. She's performing relaxation." Back in the interrogation room, Detective Miller slammed his hand on the table. The sudden noise would have made an innocent person jump. Evelyn merely tilted her head, looking at his hand as if it was a rude insect. "Richard Vance has been missing for 48 hours, Evelyn. His car was found abandoned near the marina. His phone is dead, and you're sitting here telling me you went to a spa appointment yesterday morning." "It was a deep tissue massage, Detective," Evelyn said. "I had it booked for weeks. Should I have cancelled it because my husband decided to throw a tantrum and run off with whatever 20-year-old caught his eye this month?" "You don't seem worried," Minna pressed, leaning into her personal space. "I am not worried because I know Richard," she countered. "He is dramatic. He is selfish. He will be back when he runs out of clean socks or adoration." The polygraph stylus remained steady. Arthur, behind the glass, narrowed his eyes. He watched the corner of her mouth, just a millimeter of tension in the orbicularis oris muscle. It wasn't fear, it wasn't sadness, it was contempt. "She hates him," Arthur whispered to himself. "She doesn't just dislike him, she holds him in absolute, biological disgust." The captain sighed, rubbing his temples. "Arthur, we have nothing." The forensics came back clean from the house. No blood, no struggle. The timeline matches her story. The neighbors saw nothing, and she's beating the box. If we hold her any longer, without a charge, her lawyers will eat us alive. We have to cut her loose. Arthur didn't respond immediately. He was rewinding the scene in his mind, replaying her answers. He was listening not to the words, but to the silence between them. He was looking for the leakage, the tiny, involuntary signals that leak out when the brain has to suppress a lie. But Evelyn Vance was a fortress. This is the terrifying reality of the human mind. We like to believe that evil looks like a monster, that guilt looks like shaking hands and sweaty palms. But sometimes, the darkest souls are the calmest ones in the room. They are the ones who can look you in the eye and smile while standing on the ashes of everything they destroyed. And speaking of seeing the truth behind the lies, if you have ever felt that gut instinct warning you about someone, that little voice saying something is wrong here, even when everything looks perfect, you know exactly what we're talking about. That instinct is your primal survival mechanism kicking in. If you want to learn how to spot the wolves in sheep's clothing and hear more stories about the hidden darkness in human nature, please take a second right now to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us bring these deep psychological mysteries to light. Now back to the interrogation room, where the tension was about to snap. Detective Miller straightened up, defeated. He looked at the mirror, knowing the captain was watching. He gave a slight shrug. "All right, Mrs. Vance," Miller said, his voice flat. "Unstrap her." The technician moved in, peeling the sensors off Evelyn's fingers. Evelyn didn't rub her hands or sigh in relief. She simply watched the process with that same detached, icy boredom. "Am I free to go?" she asked, standing up. She smoothed down the front of her cashmere sweater, checking for lint that wasn't there. "For now," Miller said, opening the door. "But don't leave town." "I have a gala on Saturday, Detective," she said, picking up her Hermes bag. "I have no intention of leaving. Unlike my husband, I have responsibilities." She turned toward the door. Her movements were fluid, graceful. She walked with the confidence of a woman who had just walked through fire and didn't even smell like smoke. She had won. She knew it. The police knew it. The machine confirmed it. In the observation room, Arthur felt a cold spike in his chest. It was the feeling of injustice, sharp and bitter. He watched her profile as she turned, and then he saw it. It was fleeting. It lasted less than a quarter of a second. As Evelyn looked at the reflection in the mirror, his reflection, though she couldn't see him, her chin lifted slightly. Her eyelids lowered just a fraction. It was a look of triumph, but not just triumph. It was duping delight, the thrill of the lie, the ecstasy of controlling the narrative. "No," Arthur said. He didn't shout, but the word carried the weight of a gavel striking a sound block. "Arthur, let it go," the captain said. We can't hold her. She didn't kill him, Arthur said rapidly, his mind racing, connecting dots that weren't there a second ago. That's why she passed the test. What? The captain looked confused. If she didn't kill him, then she's innocent. No. Arthur turned, his eyes blazing with a terrifying intensity. You asked her if she murdered him. You asked her if she shot him, stabbed him, poisoned him. She said no, and the machine said true, because she didn't do those things. Arthur moved toward the door of the observation room. She didn't end his life, she ended his existence. In her mind, she isn't the killer. She's just the hand of fate. Arthur, you can't go in there, the captain barked. Protocol. Protocol is for people who play by the rules, Arthur said, pushing the door open. Evelyn Vance is playing a different game entirely. In the hallway, Evelyn was just stepping out of the interrogation room. The fluorescent lights of the corridor reflected off her perfectly blow-dried hair. She looked like she was leaving a boring board meeting, not a murder inquiry. She checked her watch. A Cartier tank, understated and expensive. Mrs. Vance, a voice called out. It wasn't the rough growl of Detective Miller. It was a baritone, smooth and commanding, wrapping around her like velvet. Evelyn stopped. She didn't turn immediately. She paused, calculating. Then she pivoted slowly on her heel. Dr. Arthur Sterling stood at the end of the hallway, blocking her path to the exit. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing a tailored suit, dark navy, with a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked less like a cop and more like a predator who had just spotted prey. I believe we haven't been introduced, Evelyn said, her voice cool. I assume you're another detective who wants to ask me where my husband keeps his passport. Arthur walked towards her. He didn't walk with the aggressive swagger of a cop. He walked with the measured, silent steps of a hunter. He stopped 3 feet from her, invading her personal space, just enough to be uncomfortable, but not enough to be threatening. I'm not a detective, Evelyn, Arthur said. He used her first name. A power move. It stripped away her social title, her shield of Mrs. Vance. And I don't care about his passport. Evelyn's eyes tightened. Just a fraction. Then get out of my way. I have a driver waiting. You passed the polygraph, Arthur said, ignoring her demand. Flying colors. It was impressive, truly. Most people have a baseline anxiety just being in a police station. You are calmer than you are at your country club. I have a clear conscience, Evelyn said, clutching her bag slightly tighter. Do you? Arthur tilted his head. He was studying her face, mapping every pore, every twitch. Or do you just have a very specific definition of reality? Excuse me. Narcissists often do, Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a conversational whisper. They rewrite history in real time. If they believe they are the victim, then whatever they do to retaliate isn't a crime. It's justice. It's balancing the scales. Evelyn let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. Are you the precinct psychiatrist? Because this is pathetic. My husband left me. I am the victim here. Are you? Arthur took a step closer. He was now uncomfortably close. He could smell her perfume Chanel No. 5, crisp and floral, masking the scent of the precinct. You didn't show a single micro-expression of grief, Evelyn. Not one. When Miller mentioned Richard might never come back, your eyebrows didn't pull together. Your lips didn't thin. You didn't swallow hard. Nothing. I'm a private person, she hissed. I don't perform for an audience. Oh, but you do, Arthur countered softly. You are performing right now. You're performing the wronged wife. But the mask is slipping, Evelyn. I can see the edges. The hallway was silent. Detective Miller and the captain were watching from the doorway of the interrogation room, stunned. They had never seen Arthur like this. He was usually the observer, the shadow. Now, he was the storm. I am leaving, Evelyn announced. She tried to step around him. Arthur moved with her, blocking her path again. I have one question, Evelyn, just one. The machine asked you the wrong things. They asked you about facts. I want to ask you about a feeling. I don't have to answer you, she spat. The veneer of calm was cracking. Her chest was rising and falling faster now. You don't, Arthur agreed. But you want to. Because you're smarter than everyone else in this building, aren't you? You fooled the machine. You fooled the detective. You want to prove you can fool me too. He had hooked her. He appealed to her ego. The narcissist's fatal flaw. The need to prove superiority. Evelyn stopped. She squared her shoulders. She looked Arthur dead in the eye, her blue eyes icy and defiant. Ask your question, and then get out of my way. Arthur smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found a loose thread in a sweater and was about to pull. Let's go back inside, Arthur said, gesturing to the open door of the interrogation room. Just for a moment. I want you to sit in the chair. You don't even have to hook up the sensors if you don't want to, although it would be interesting to see the graph now. Evelyn hesitated. Her mind was racing. If she refused, she looked weak. If she accepted, she proved she had nothing to hide. She was arrogant. She believed she was untouchable. Fine, she said, turning and marching back into the room. One question. Then I call my lawyer and sue this department for harassment. She sat back in the metal chair. The room felt smaller now. The air felt heavier. Arthur followed her in. He nodded to the technician. Hook her up. Just the cardio and galvanic skin response. Evelyn rolled her eyes but extended her hand. She watched the sensors being applied with disdain. This is a waste of taxpayer money. Arthur waited until the technician stepped back. He waited until the graph started scrolling on the screen. The lines were jagged now, not flat. She was annoyed. Good. Annoyance was an emotion. It was a doorway. Arthur walked around the table. He didn't sit in the detective's chair. He sat on the edge of the table, looking down at her. He loomed over her, changing the power dynamic. He was high. She was low. You said Richard left, Arthur began, his voice hypnotic. You said he took his things. But Richard was a man of comfort, wasn't he? He liked his silk sheets. He liked his imported scotch. He wasn't a man who would survive well in the rough. He's resilient, Evelyn said. The needle on the graph jumped slightly. A lie. She didn't believe he was resilient. She thought he was weak. Is he? Arthur asked. Or was he just loud? There's a difference, said Evelyn. You know that. You were the strength in the marriage, weren't you? You were the spine. He was just the wallet. Evelyn's lips twitched. A tiny upward curve. She liked that description. I managed our lives, yes. Richard was ... Chaoto. Chaoto. Arthur repeated. Like a child. Exactly. And children need to be disciplined, don't they? Arthur's voice dropped an octave. When they misbehave, and they threaten to leave the mother. When they threaten to take the money and run. I didn't discipline him, Evelyn said coldly. I let him go. Did you? Arthur leaned in. He was so close now that he could see the flecks of grey in her blue eyes. Or did you just put him in a timeout? The room went deadly silent. The phrase timeout hung in the air like a toxic gas. The graph spiked, a sharp vertical line. Adrenaline. Arthur saw it. He didn't look at the screen, but he felt the shift in her energy. Her pupils dilated. The fight-or-flight response was kicking in. But Evelyn Vance didn't flee. She fought. You are speaking in riddles, she said, her voice tight. I'm speaking about control, Evelyn, Arthur whispered. The ultimate control. The police looked for a body. They looked for a weapon. But you didn't use a weapon. That's too messy, too pedestrian. You're not a butcher. You're an architect. Arthur stood up and walked behind her chair. He placed his hands on the back of the metal frame, leaning close to her ear. You didn't kill him in the heat of the moment. You didn't shoot him. You passed the test because you didn't end his life. You just changed his location. Evelyn stared straight ahead at the two-way mirror. Her breathing was shallow, controlled, but her hands were gripping the armrests so hard, her knuckles were white. Ask your question, she whispered, or let me go. Arthur moved back to the front. He stood directly in her line of sight. He blocked out the world. It was just him and her, "Okay," Arthur said. "Here it is." He took a deep breath, preparing to deliver the blow that would shatter the glass wall she had built around her mind. "When you closed the door, Evelyn ... Arthur started, his voice trembling with simulated empathy, a trap laid with honey. "When you turned that heavy handle and heard the lock click, knowing nobody could hear him ... double quotes." He paused. The silence stretched for an eternity. Arthur leaned in closer, invading the sanctuary of her personal space until his breath ghosted against her ear. The air in the room seemed to vanish, sucked into the vacuum of the moment. Did he beg for his life, Evelyn? Or did he cry like a child? The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. For a heartbeat there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens right before a car crash, when time stretches and warps. Evelyn didn't blink. She didn't pull away. And then it happened. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a sob. It was something far more terrifying. The corner of Evelyn's mouth twitched upward, just the left side, a sharp, involuntary spasm of the zygomaticus major muscle. It was a micro-expression that lasted less than a fifth of a second, but to Arthur Sterling, it was as loud as a gunshot. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pleasure. Simultaneously, the polygraph machine behind her went berserk. The stylus, which had been drawing lazy, rhythmic hills, suddenly jagged violently upward, scratching frantically against the digital limit of the screen. The heart rate monitor spiked from a resting 65 to 120 in a single beat. "Look at that," Arthur shouted, pointing at the screen, breaking the hypnotic spell. "Look at the graph." Detective Miller, who had been watching with his mouth slightly open, lunged forward. "She's panicking. She's lying." "No." Arthur spun around, his eyes wide with the thrill of the hunt. "She isn't panicking, Miller. Look at the galvanic skin response. Look at the amplitude. Panic is erratic. Fear is chaotic. This is rhythmic. This is excitement." Arthur turned back to Evelyn, who was now breathing heavily, her chest heaving not with terror, but with the rush of adrenaline that comes from reliving a moment of absolute power. "It's called duping delight," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the room. "The sheer ecstasy of getting away with it. The pleasure of controlling another human being's fate. You aren't scared, Evelyn. You're aroused by the memory." Evelyn's face flushed. The mask was gone. The cool, detached socialite had evaporated, replaced by something feral and intensely arrogant. She looked at the graph, then at Arthur. She didn't see a cop. She saw an audience. And a narcissist cannot resist an audience. "He was pathetic," Evelyn whispered. The words tumbled out, unable to be contained. "He didn't even fight back. He cried, didn't he?" Arthur pressed, keeping the pressure on. "He begged you to open the door." "He begged," she spat, her eyes gleaming with a cruel light. "He promised me everything. Money, the house in the Hamptons. He said he would change. He said he loved me." She laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "He didn't love me. He loved what I did for him. He loved the order I brought to his messy, pathetic little life. So you locked him in," Arthur said. "Where, Evelyn? Where did you lock him?" Evelyn stopped. The logical part of her brain tried to slam the brakes, but the emotional high was too strong. She felt invincible. She had already passed the lie detector. In her twisted logic, she was still safe because she hadn't touched him. "I didn't kill him," she said, her voice taking on a haughty, lecturing tone. "I simply gave him a choice, a test of character. If he was truly the strong man he claimed to be, he would find a way out. If he was weak, well, nature has a way of pruning the weak branches. You'll put him in the panic room," Arthur guessed. "At the main house? Don't be stupid," Evelyn sneered. "The panic room has a cellular uplink and an internal oxygen scrubber. He would be out in an hour. I put him somewhere, quiet. Somewhere he could finally listen to himself, think, without interrupting me." Arthur's mind raced. He scanned his memory of the case file, the properties, The assets. Where would a woman like Evelyn, obsessed with preservation and control, put a man she wanted to erase? The wine cellar, Miller asked. Too accessible, Arthur muttered. He looked at Evelyn's hands. Her manicure was perfect, but there was a tiny microscopic abrasion on the side of her thumb. A friction burn from a heavy dial. A lever? The vault, Arthur said. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The old bank vault in the basement of the summer estate. The one you bought for the art collection. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. The pupil dilation was massive. It's hermetically sealed, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. Fireproof, waterproof, soundproof, and airtight. It preserves beauty, Evelyn said dreamily. It keeps things from rotting. It stops time. How much air is in there, Evelyn? Arthur grabbed the arms of her chair, leaning into her face. How big is the room? Big enough for a few paintings, she shrugged. Maybe. 12 hours of air? If he stays calm. But Richard... Richard never stays calm. He hyperventilates when he can't find his cufflinks. Arthur spun around to Miller. Get the squad, now. The Lake Union estate. The basement vault. He's not missing. He's suffocating. Miller didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio, shouting codes as he sprinted out of the room. All units. 10 to 18. Life or death. Lake Union estate. Suspect confirms victim trapped in airtight vault. Evelyn sat back in the chair, a look of confusion crossing her face. Why are you running? She asked, genuinely perplexed. It's been 48 hours. He's gone. It was his destiny. Arthur looked at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. It wasn't destiny, Evelyn. It was murder, and you just confessed. I did no such thing, she snapped, straightening her sweater. I said I left him there. I didn't touch a hair on his head. The law requires a cause of death linked to an action. I performed no action. I simply ceased to assist his survival. You really believe that? Arthur said, shaking his head. You actually believe you're the victim here? I am, she screamed, suddenly losing her composure as the reality of the situation began to fracture her delusion. Do you know what it's like to live with a man who looks through you? I made him. I built his image, and he wanted to leave me for a barista. A barista? Arthur didn't answer. He turned and ran after Miller. The drive to the Lake Union estate was a blur of sirens and rain. The weather had turned violent, the grey drizzle transforming into a torrential downpour that hammered against the windshield of the squad car. Arthur sat in the passenger seat, gripping the handle, his knuckles white. Faster, Arthur urged. I'm doing 80 in a 40 zone, Doc, Miller shouted, wrestling the steering wheel as the car hydroplanes slightly on the slick asphalt. He has been in there for 2 days, Arthur calculated, his mind working the math of death. If the seal is perfect, the CO2 levels would have knocked him unconscious 10 hours ago. The oxygen deprivation. Brain damage starts at 4 minutes without air. But in a sealed room, it's a slow fade. It's like falling asleep. You think he's dead? Miller asked, his voice tight. I think Evelyn Vance is a monster who did a math wrong, Arthur said grimly. She said 12 hours if he stays calm. But she underestimated the volume of the room. Those old vaults. They have high ceilings. There might be a pocket. A chance. They screeched through the iron gates of the Vance estate, the tires tearing up the perfectly manicured gravel driveway. The house loomed out of the rain, a massive structure of stone and glass, dark and imposing. It looked like a mausoleum. Miller kicked the door open before the car had fully stopped. Breached him. Basement. Go, go, go. Uniformed officers swarmed the porch. The front door was locked, but a battering ram made short work of the expensive mahogany. Wood splintered with a sickening crunch, and the police flooded into the foyer. Downstairs, Arthur shouted, leading the way. He knew the layout from the blueprints in the file. The wine cellar connects to the secure storage. They pounded down the stairs, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The power was out in the basement. Evelyn must have cut the breaker to stop the ventilation fans, ensuring the seal was absolute. At the end of a long concrete corridor stood the door. It was a beast of a thing, a circular steel door, polished chrome and reinforced steel, salvaged from a 1920s bank. It was beautiful and terrifying. "It's locked," the lead officer shouted, pulling on the massive wheel. "Digital keypad and mechanical tumble. Get the drill," Miller ordered. "No time," Arthur yelled. He ran to the door and pressed his ear against the cold steel. Silence. Absolute heavy silence. "Richard," Arthur screamed, pounding on the metal with his fist. "Richard, can you hear me?" "Nothing." "Blow it," Miller commanded. "We can't," the SWAT leader argued. "Explosives in a confined space. The overpressure will kill him if the lack of air hasn't already." Arthur looked at the keypad. It was a biometric scanner, combined with a numeric code. Evelyn's code. "She said she wanted to teach him a lesson," Arthur muttered, closing his eyes, trying to channel the mind of the woman he had just analyzed. "She's a narcissist. Everything is about her. The code isn't random. It's not his birthday. It's not their anniversary." "What is it then?" Miller yelled, panic rising. "It's the date she saved him," Arthur said, his eyes snapping open. "She said she made him. She said she built his image. When did they meet? When did she take over his company?" Miller fumbled with his phone, pulling up the background check. They met June 14th, 2010. She took over as CEO of his holding company on August 21st, 2012. "Try the CEO date," Arthur commanded. 082112. The officer punched it in. Beep, 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 beep. Beep, beep, error. Red light. Damn it. Miller kicked the wall. "Think, Arthur, think," the mentalist whispered to himself. He visualized Evelyn's face in the interrogation room. The look of superiority. "I am the victim here." "It's not a date," Arthur realized. "It's a statement." Narcissists love simple, numerical representations of their own greatness. She thinks she is number one. She thinks he is nothing. "Try 1000, Arthur said, one followed by zeros. "That's too simple," the officer argued. "Do it," the officer typed. 10000000. The light blinked yellow. The Nordod. Green. The heavy tumblers inside the door clanked, a sound like the earth shifting. Clunk, clunk, clunk. "Pull," Miller shouted. 3 officers grabbed the wheel and heaved. The massive door groaned, the hinges protesting against the weight. A hiss of air rushed inward, the vacuum breaking. It sounded like a gasp. The door swung open. The smell hit them first. It wasn't the smell of death, exactly. It was the smell of stale, recycled air, sharp with the scent of urine and fear. Arthur pushed past the officers, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The vault was empty of art. It was a concrete box. In the center of the floor, curled into a fetal ball, lay Richard Vance. He was pale, his skin a translucent gray under the beam of the light. His expensive suit was torn. His fingernails were bloody stumps. Arthur looked at the inside of the steel door. It was covered in scratches. Desperate, frantic scratches, where Richard had tried to claw his way through 3 inches of solid steel with his bare hands. The sight was horrifica, testament of a pure, animal panic of being buried alive. "Medic," Arthur screamed, dropping to his knees beside the body. He pressed 2 fingers to Richard's neck. The skin was cold, clammy. "Come on, Richard," Arthur whispered. "Don't let her win." Silence. And then, a flutter, weak, thready, like a moth trapped under a glass. But it was there. "He has a pulse," Arthur yelled. "It's weak. Get oxygen, now." The paramedics swarmed in, pushing Arthur aside. They clamped a mask over Richard's face, pumping pure oxygen into his starved lungs. "His chest is moving," the medic announced. "Shallow respirations. He's in a deep coma, but he's alive." Arthur slumped back against the cold concrete wall, letting out a breath he felt like he had been holding for an hour. He looked around the vault. On the floor, near where Richard's head had been, was a message scrawled in blood. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a goodbye. It was one word: sorry. Arthur stared at it. Even in his final moments, dying of suffocation, Richard had been so broken by Evelyn's psychological torture that he apologized for dying. "That," Arthur whispered, anger burning in his chest like a coal, "is what true evil looks like." 2 hours later, the rain had stopped, leaving the world dripping and cold. Evelyn Vance was being led out of the precinct in handcuffs. She wasn't walking with her head down. She was walking with her chin up, furious. Reporters had gathered, tipped off by the police scanner. Cameras flashed, blinding white explosions in the night. "Mrs. Vance, did you try to kill him? Mrs. Vance, is it true he was in the vault?" Evelyn stopped at the bottom of the stairs. She saw Arthur standing by the squad car. She locked eyes with him. She didn't look guilty. She looked ... disappointed. "He survived, didn't he?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise of the press. Arthur nodded slowly. "He's in the IQ, he's going to make it. And when he wakes up, Evelyn, I'm going to be there to tell him that he doesn't have to be sorry anymore." Evelyn sneered, a true ugly expression that distorted her beautiful face into a gargoyle mask. "He's a cockroach. You can step on him, you can starve him, but he just won't die. He doesn't have the dignity to die. Get her out of here," Miller ordered, shoving her into the back of the cruiser. As the car pulled away, Arthur watched the red taillights fade into the city traffic. He felt a heavy exhaustion settling into his bones. It wasn't physical tired, it was soul tired. He turned to the cam, breaking the fourth wall, looking directly at you. "We like to think that monsters hide under the bed," Arthur said, his voice thoughtful and somber. "But the scariest monsters are the ones who sleep in it." Evelyn Vance passed a lie detector test because she had rewritten her own reality. She believed her own lie so completely that her body didn't even register it as a deception. He walked slowly down the precinct steps, the wet pavement reflecting the city lights. She didn't see her husband. She saw an object, a possession that had malfunctioned. And when a possession breaks, you don't mourn it, you discard it. That total lack of empathy, ... that ability to shut off the human connection, that is the hallmark of the dark triad personality. Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy. Arthur stopped under a street lamp, the light casting long shadows across his face. Richard survived because of a miracle, and because of a single micro-expression. A tiny, fleeting smile of delight that betrayed the darkness hiding behind a beautiful face. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who in your life is wearing a mask? Who is smiling at you while holding the key to your cage? He leaned in closer to the lens. If this story chilled you to the bone, if it made you look at the people around you just a little bit differently, then do me a favor. Leave a comment below telling me, have you ever met someone whose eyes didn't match their smile? Someone who gave you that instinctual feeling of danger? Arthur turned his collar up against the cold wind. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that explore the hidden corners of the human mind, because the truth is out there, but sometimes you have to look very, very closely to see it. Until next time, stay observant and stay safe. The screen fades to black as the sound of a single steady heartbeat echoes in the silence.